Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep, really deep, into a topic that hits close to home for a lot of adults out there.
Absolutely.
We're talking about the tricky intersection of, well, non-stereotypical autism and avoidant personality disorder.
Right. And, especially for those who've maybe felt different their whole lives, but never quite understood why.
Exactly. We're using a blog post today from Cheap ABA, and the title is a mouthful, but it's the heart of the matter: Non-stereotypical autism and avoidant personality disorder, a misdiagnosis.
Yeah. So misdiagnosis is what we're diving into today,
Yeah.
figuring out why it happens.
Why it happens, what those overlapping symptoms are that make it so confusing, and most importantly, I think, why getting that accurate diagnosis can be life-changing, really.
Absolutely.
So let's start with the basics. When we talk about non-stereotypical autism, what exactly are we talking about?
Well, sometimes it's called masking or camouflaging,
Yeah.
right? And it's kind of like it makes autism harder to spot, especially in adults they've learned to adapt over the years.
So it's less about those classic representations we often see and more about, I guess, blending in.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, imagine you're always analyzing social interactions, like constantly trying to decode those unspoken rules and cues, and it's exhausting, right?
Oh, absolutely. I can see how that would be.
Yeah, and that's what masking can feel like for someone with non-stereotypical autism. It's almost like they're wearing this mask that hides their true self.
Hmm. That's a powerful way to put it. So if it's so subtle, how do we even start to recognize it?
Right, and that's where things get really complicated. But, the blog post highlights three kind of like shared symptoms that often lead to this confusion. So social anxiety, fear of rejection, and then, difficulty expressing emotions.
Well, I mean, those are things a lot of people experience, whether or not they have autism or AVPD.
Right. Yeah, you're totally right.
So what makes them different in these contexts?
Well, it's really about the intensity and how pervasive those feelings are. That really sets it apart.
Okay, so it's not just about feeling awkward at a party. It's a constant fear of social interaction that impacts, well, everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it goes even deeper than that. Like fear of rejection, it's not just about, not getting a date. It's this like paralyzing fear of judgment that stops them from even trying, like pursuing relationships or opportunities.
And then difficulty expressing emotions, I guess that means they struggle to even articulate their feelings.
Right. Or sometimes it's like feeling emotionally disconnected from others. It's really about understanding the depth and how much these symptoms actually impact them.
Okay, so it's about looking beyond the surface.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is where that misdiagnosis thing becomes, well, a big problem.
Yeah, I can see how that would happen.
If you're just looking at those like surface level symptoms without really thinking about the underlying reasons behind them, it's easy to miss the mark, right?
It's like treating the symptoms without actually addressing the root cause of the problem.
Exactly. And that's why getting the right diagnosis is so important. It's the starting point for effective treatment and support.
Right. So why does this misdiagnosis happen in the first place? The blog post, it points to a few key factors, right?
Yeah, well, masking is a big one, like we talked about, right? It's like almost like a chameleon blending into its surroundings, and
Yeah.
you can't see its true colors.
And remember that image of the mask. It's got to take a lot of energy to keep that mask up all the time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads to exhaustion, burnout, all of that. And then there's the problem of just like lack of awareness.
Okay, so not every mental health professional is up to speed on this.
Right. Especially when it comes to the more subtle ways autism presents, especially in adults.
It's like looking for a specific flower in a field of wildflowers. If you don't know what you're looking for, you could miss it entirely.
Exactly. And then, unfortunately, there's still a lot of stigma.
Yeah, we can't forget about that.
The blog post mentions this idea, this misconception that autism is like a childhood condition, right?
Like you just grow out of it or something.
Yeah, and that leads to misdiagnoses in adults just because, well, people don't even consider it as a possibility.
Yeah, it's like assuming a tree stops growing once it reaches a certain height, but growth and change continue, and that includes how autism might show up.
Absolutely. And that brings us to, well, a really crucial question. If any of this is resonating with you, you might be wondering, like, why does this even matter so much? Why is getting the diagnosis right so important?
That's a great question, and that's where we'll pick things up next time.
Well, I think we've all heard that saying, knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, especially true when it comes to mental health. If you're struggling with something, understanding what it is, what you're dealing with, that can be so empowering.
It's like having a map to navigate a really complex terrain.
Exactly.
Without it, you're, much more likely to get lost or just wander around in circles.
Exactly. An accurate diagnosis, it really is like that map.
Right.
It gives you this framework for understanding what you're going through, helps you identify your strengths, the challenges you face, and then ultimately find the right path to support and just, well, a better life.
So it's not just about putting a label on things, it's about unlocking a deeper understanding of yourself, right?
Exactly. And that understanding, that's the key that unlocks effective treatment.
Hmm.
I mean, think about it this way. If you went to the doctor with a cough, right, and they treated you for allergies when it was actually pneumonia, well, you're not going to get better.
That makes perfect sense. You need the right diagnosis to get the right treatment. It's the same thing with mental health, right?
Absolutely. And when it comes to mental health, misdiagnosis, well, it can lead to years of frustration. You
Yeah.
might be trying therapies that just don't work. It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah, it just doesn't work, and it can be so disheartening, especially if you've been struggling for a long time without any real answers.
Exactly. So advocating for yourself, seeking out that proper evaluation, that's crucial. And it's about finding a mental health professional who really gets it, who is experienced in, well, diagnosing autism in adults.
Especially those who might be good at masking.
Yeah, exactly. And that might take some time and effort. You might have to ask a lot of questions, maybe get a second opinion. But it's important to find a therapist who you feel, really understands your concerns. Remember, you're your own best advocate. You have the right to seek the care and support that you deserve.
Absolutely. What I'm hearing is this. It's not just about autism or AVPD. It's about empowering yourself with knowledge. Understanding this complex world of mental health and really knowing that you're not alone in this.
Right. And, the blog post, that brings up another important point. It's not just about these two conditions. There are so many other conditions that can, like, overlap, that can make accurate diagnoses even harder.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing, right?
Things like ADHD, OCD, anxiety disorders, even depression. All of these can sometimes look like autism, or they can mask autism. It really is like this tangled web where everything's connected.
Right. It's hard to tell where one thing ends and another begins.
Exactly. And I think it's so important to remember that each person's experience is unique, right? Their journey with mental health, that's unique too. It's not about fitting neatly into these little boxes or categories. It's about understanding the individual.
Yeah, it's about seeing the whole picture, not just focusing on isolated symptoms.
Right. And that's why a comprehensive evaluation is so important. You need all the pieces of the puzzle to really see what's going on.
That's a really good takeaway for our listeners. Don't be afraid to ask those questions, to advocate for yourself or your loved ones, and to find those professionals who really understand the autism spectrum. They're out there.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power,
Yeah.
right? And the more we all understand about these conditions, the better equipped we are to support each other and ourselves.
This has been such an insightful conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time. We've covered a lot, and I hope our listeners are feeling, more informed, more empowered. But before we wrap things up, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, about the impact of masking. You talked about, exhaustion, burnout. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Like, what are the consequences of masking over a long period of time?
Yeah, that's something that's so often overlooked, right? I mean, it's important to understand that masking, it's a coping mechanism. It's a way for people to, to try and navigate a world that doesn't always understand or accept them.
It's like putting on this performance every day, trying to fit these social expectations that just don't come naturally.
Exactly. And it's exhausting,
Yeah.
It can lead to emotional exhaustion, a lot of social anxiety, and even physical health problems. It's like running a marathon every single day without a break. Eventually you hit that wall.
So for anyone out there who might be masking, it's so important to prioritize self-care, to find ways to recharge.
Absolutely. It's not selfish to take care of yourself. It's essential. Find those things that bring you joy, that help you relax. Connect with people who get it, who accept you for who you are, and give yourself permission to take breaks when you need them.
It's a good reminder that self-care isn't a luxury. It's a necessity.
Exactly. Especially for those who are, navigating the challenges of non-stereotypical autism. And remember, seeking support, that's a sign of strength, not weakness. There are resources available, therapists, support groups. There are even online communities where you can connect with others who, well, who really get it.
Right. Find your tribe, the people who understand, who can offer support without judgment.
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to go through this alone. There are people who care, who want to help.
Well, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you again for joining us and sharing your insights. I hope this is giving everyone listening a new perspective on non-stereotypical autism and, maybe inspired some of you to, well, to take that next step.
Yeah, and remember, this is just the start of your deep dive, right?
Yeah.
There's always more to learn, more to explore. Keep asking questions, keep seeking knowledge, and keep advocating for yourself.
That's a perfect way to transition to our final thoughts. So we've talked about masking and diagnosis and self-advocacy, but there's something we haven't really touched on yet, and that's those long-term consequences.
Mhm.
If you're living with non-stereotypical autism and it's undiagnosed and you're not getting the support you need, what happens?
Yeah, that's a crucial point. It could really impact your well-being your whole life, really. I mean,
Hmm.
if you're constantly masking, if you're always trying to suppress who you are just to fit in, it takes a toll, you
Yeah,
know?
like carrying a heavy weight around all the time.
Exactly. And eventually it wears you down. You might start experiencing chronic anxiety, depression, maybe even burnout. Relationships can be tough because you're afraid to let people see the real you. Even your career can suffer, especially if you're in a workplace that doesn't understand or accommodate neurodiversity.
Right. So getting that diagnosis and the support you need, it's not just about feeling better. It's about creating a life where you can actually thrive.
Exactly. Being your authentic self without feeling like you have to constantly mask or pretend. And that's why early intervention is so important. The sooner you get that accurate diagnosis, the sooner you can start building those coping mechanisms, finding the support systems you need.
It's like giving someone a toolbox with all the right tools.
Right. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Instead of struggling with tools that don't fit, you have what you need to succeed.
Mm.
And it all comes back to self-advocacy. If you think this might be you, don't wait for someone else to notice or validate your experiences. Go out there and find the information. Connect with professionals who specialize in autism in adults. Find your people.
Find your tribe, the people who get it. Right.
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to go through this alone.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. I hope everyone listening is walking away feeling a little bit more informed, a little more empowered.
I hope so too.
But, before we sign off, I want to leave everyone with a final thought. We've talked a lot about finding the right professional support, but something that's just as important, I think, is finding your community. Finding your tribe of people who understand and embrace neurodiversity. What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. Finding those safe spaces where you can just be yourself, no judgment, where you can connect with others who get it, who have similar experiences, and you can all learn from each other. It's about building that support system that helps you thrive, that helps you be your best self.
I love that, building that support system. Well, on that note, we'll wrap things up. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, knowledge is power, and the first step to seeking support is understanding the possibilities. If anything we talked about today resonated with you, don't hesitate to reach out to a qualified mental health professional for guidance and support. Until next time, keep diving deep and stay curious.